So this is a continuation on communication, and more specifically in the realm of attachment styles of communication. And today's topic is going to be with dismissive avoidant in communication, right? You can see that right here, all right? And they have a unique way of coping and communicating with different relationships. That could be romantic, that could be with friendships, it could be family. And different people can have different ways of communicating with each individual group. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I have a lot of things in my background. I have my doctorate, I have my master's. I actually taught at 2 universities, a medical school and also a nursing school for 3 years. I actually bought real estate. I bought an apartment complex. I started multiple businesses. But basically, it just means I'm a super nerd that I want to be able to do the research to be able to help you guys understand things that took me years or things that can help me break things down for you to make it easier for you to digest. But again, this channel has a few things on it. It has relationships, single dad or parenting, depending on your flavor, personal growth, and also attachment theory. Okay, now this is gonna be probably more again with the relationship and actually the attachment theory, but it's gonna be really good about explaining what communication styles and tips and actually ways they cope with relationships and some ways to potentially resolve those things. So looking forward to it, but let's talk about attachment styles and theory first so you have a base understanding of it before we go into it. Check it out, let's go. So easy breakdown on attachment theory. More in-depth video here that I've done earlier, so check that out. But attachment theory, just you have a caregiver and you have a child. And depending on that relationship between that caregiver and the child sees modeling from that caregiver on how to handle relationships, how to show up in relationships. So when that child gets older, what happens is they start to look for what's familiar and they look for relationships that they're used to and also replicate the modeling that was shown to them by that caregiver. And so there's 4 major attachment styles. You have 1 secure attachment style and 3 insecure attachment styles. That'll be anxious preoccupied, dismissive avoidant, and also fearful avoidant. Now there's different terms you can use. We can look that up again in another video I talked about. But what happens with the secure attachment, they usually have a positive view of themselves and they have a positive view of the people. Because they were modeled healthy relationships and how to communicate, they know what's familiar, that's normal, and so they'll only be around people and they know they can trust people that have the characteristics that they were modeled before. Compared to anxious preoccupied, they have a negative view of themselves but a positive view of the people. So what happens in those situations, they actually don't trust themselves, so they try to look for other people. And that usually happens because of inconsistent parenting, sometimes helicopter parenting. And you have dismissive avoidant, which they have a positive view of themselves and a negative view of the people. That's usually done by neglect. By childhood, they had nobody watching them, so they had to rely on themselves and they don't really trust other people because they weren't really there. And then you have fearful avoidant. Usually what happens in the situation, they have a negative view of themselves and a negative view of the people because usually some type of abuse was in that situation. Now, you can kind of see how that can affect communication. And so we're going to go into depth on that in individual attachment styles in this series. So we just talked about attachment theory and attachment styles, but now we're going to talk about the key characteristics with the dismissive avoidant. And I think it's important before we go into the communication tactics of dismissive avoidance so you understand the mindset of what's going on. But before we talk about that, let's talk about the 3 major fears that we're born with. The fear of falling, fear of loud noises, and a fear of abandonment. And each attachment style has their own way of communicating and actually coping with that abandonment. While you have secure person, which actually has healthy modeling, so they know how to have a healthy coping mechanism, while the insecure ones not so much. And dismissive avoidant, the one thing that they fear the most is emotional intimacy. They weren't modeled and was taught how to handle and adjust and cope with their emotions. And so that scares them in multiple ways. So I have an equation, which is here is called emotional intimacy equals vulnerability plus emotional expression divided by around a safe space plus or minus physical intimacy. Now, physical intimacy is different depending on if it's a male or female. That's why we're going to talk about that. But we're all going to talk about vulnerability and emotional expression. Now, what is emotional expression? It's actually being able to articulate how that person is feeling and going forward. It's very difficult for dismissive avoidant because they don't even know how they feel. They just kind of dismiss how they feel and just continue doing more things in life and not even really understanding their emotions. While vulnerability is opening up about themselves to be able to help people get closer. And so they usually are missing these 2 characteristics, which is huge. And you'll see this kind of play out with the tactics of communication when we're talking about dismissive avoidance. But let's go into these tactics. Now let's get to the juicy part of this. And that's gonna be dismissive avoidant in their communication tactics. And the number one thing they have, they're over boundary makers, right? I mean, their counterpart, the anxious, they actually have no boundaries or it's non-existent. Compared to the dismissive, they have solid boundaries. If you get too close to the boundaries, you don't have to cross it. They run away. And so that's number one. They're really good with their boundaries, almost to a fault, to a point where they don't want to open up. Like we talked about the vulnerability and also the emotional expression. Number two, they pull away from a situation. So like if they get too overwhelmed with emotion or don't know how to handle the situation, they actually will need space. Okay, they'll go away from the relationship or the situation or even the environment. They have number three, all or nothing thinking. They want things to be perfect. And if you're not perfect in how you say, even to the specific words you're saying, if they're perfect on how they think is correct, then it's all or nothing. That means, okay, you're not the right person. You're the problem. Number four, they avoid conflict. So they'll be around you and they'll have conflict, but then they won't communicate about it because they don't know how to express how they feel. So they'll just find ways to like coexist with that individual, even though this deep conflict is going on. Or if the person's bringing up a conflict, they'll just find ways to kind of deflect and minimize, change subjects so they don't have to actually go to the conflict. And then lastly is they shut down. Sometimes when they can't get out and they can't escape, they'll just emotionally just shut down. They will have like no emotion. They won't even feel anything because it's how they cope with emotions in general. And that's when their model, their parent did that to them, they didn't know how to handle it. So they just sat motionless. So what are some ways to improve communication within a dismissive avoidant? And you gotta look at it from two different ways. You gotta look at it from the dismissive avoidant itself and also the partner of the dismissive avoidant, right? And they have different tactics on how they can be able to help improve communication between those two. But let's start off with the dismissive avoidant, all right? Number one is gonna be recognizing. You gotta recognize that you have a problem in the first place. Are you a dismissive avoidant? What's good about dismissive avoidants are they're very analytical. And if you can make a correlation that makes sense, it's hard for them to deny it. And when they start to understand these things, then they can start to realize that they may not be doing as healthy tactics in communication and revolving with their partners, or kids, or any relationship they have. Number two, emotions and vulnerability are good. They're safe. They're actually okay to do. They have to realize, a dismissive avoidant has to realize that those things are what makes you connect with people and realize that you're not alone and then you have support. All right, dismissive avoidants have to, number three, have to communicate the need for space. They have to understand, like, telling people, hey, I need space, but it's not a bad thing. If you don't communicate why you need space, then people are gonna make assumptions. Mostly the insecure attachment styles will make assumptions about why that's needed. But if you can communicate, I need space, it'll help give them peace of mind that you just need some time to figure things out. And it's not a bad thing. And then lastly, is gonna be therapy. I feel like I have a video on therapy. You can check it out. It's amazing. Understanding, but not getting a good therapist, you can also have a negative perspective of therapy. So therapy also helps a dismissive avoidant because it helps them find somebody they can trust, they can be vulnerable with, that they're paying, but they can be vulnerable with, and that builds a relationship that realizes, okay, vulnerability is not bad, and then they can replicate that outside of the relationship. Okay, so what can the partner do? All right, the partner can do is respect the need for space, all right, and independence, right? So like one thing is really important is about interdependence, is about both people having their own independence and then supporting each other. So a dismissive avoidant has relied heavily on their independence, but also they need space to kind of understand what's going on and be able to like mull over and think through what's going on. Number two, do not use confrontational language. I have another video called The Communication Killers, which shows you different tactics on way you can stop a communication. And by doing that, they won't feel like they have a safe space to be able to communicate, because each time they communicate or try to communicate, then it always gets shut down by the communication killer. And then lastly is patience, understanding, and gentle presence. Understanding that they are trying to improve, it's going to be a teeter-totter. It's going to be 3 steps forward and then 2 steps back. 5 steps forward and 3 steps back. Because the lack of trust, they're gonna see if you're really gonna be there and be consistent and work through it with them through that process. But I don't expect you just to just go willy-nilly. Setting up time frames where you can be able to check in like every month or every 2 months to see how that relationship is doing. It gives that dismissive avoidant understanding, okay, it's gonna happen, so now they can think about it beforehand, so they're not caught off guard with a question they can't answer, and when they feel like they can't answer and they can't find the words, they'll escape. So those are the things that both sides can do to really truly improve communication. So final thoughts, like and subscribe, please hit the notification bell. It helps me, it helps my daughter, and it can help you with the information, hopefully. But again, communication with the dismissive avoidant, they just have a lot of deactivating strategies. They don't know how to communicate how they feel because they weren't modeled how they were supposed to feel. And so what happens is when they try to communicate how they feel, sometimes they can't even find the words that are associated with it. So be patient with those individuals, right? But also don't be too patient where you're waiting forever, right? So always find what your goals are in a relationship in communication. If you feel like it's not moving forward the way that you like at a certain time frame, then it may be time to cut it off and let that person figure things out, and hopefully it'll work out down the road. But okay, this has been a series. We did dismissive, which is now anxious and also secure. I'm not really gonna do probably fearful because it's a combination. I may do a communication on fearful, but just stay tuned for that. But as I end all my calls, please love your kids. Sit down, just give them a hug. They need it. And they need to be told they're worthy regardless of what's going on, no matter what they've done, because they need to understand that they have self-worth regardless of anything else. If they don't teach that, then the world is gonna take advantage of them. But looking forward to seeing you guys again at my channel, look at my videos, and looking forward to seeing your comments down below.